Thanks, everyone. We'll talk a little bit about our journey on Spark, but just let me do a quick audience check. How many people are currently in production with Spark? Okay. Wow, actually a lot of people. I think most of you folks are also looking to expand, I think, throughout the company. That's great. So quick about me. I've 20 years with HP. I've done a lot of different things, both technology and business. And kind of throughout that whole endeavor, it really hasn't mattered when I was managing, or leading a technical group with 15 people or managing an extended team of 100. Data is really always what has been important. Better, faster, cheaper. So I'm overall a huge data junkie. I kind of love all these things about analytics. And I think probably a lot of people that do have an analytics background are probably a little bit into sports analytics like me too. So we have the NBA Finals coming up. Who you got? Warriors, right? Everybody's got the Warriors, all right. We're in the Bay Area. Looking forward to seeing more of those games. All right. So let me talk a little bit about HP. And part of the reason is a lot of people are often confused. So back in 2015, HP actually split. So we had a ginormous company with 300,000 plus employees, and we split into two. One is what would be typically known as HP on the consumer side, and the other side is Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and that's the group that's in the data centers. They have, racks of gear, tons of storage systems, enterprise software, etc. But even within HP, which is where I work, most people are typically familiar with the PCs or your typical desktop printers. But we really have a very large gamut of products. We have everything from a printer that you can hold in your hand to printers that are way bigger than this room. And the printers way bigger than this room are probably not the ones you guys are used to seeing. They have ink delivered in, collections of 55-gallon drums. But all of these products are collecting data of some type. Whether it's the PCs, they're collecting data about battery life, printers tracking items on usage and supplies, to our copiers and 3D printers. But the dimensions are pretty different. So the consumer devices, there's tens to hundreds of millions of them. But on the enterprise side, we have our 3D printers and those very, very large printers on the right. There's not a lot of them, but they generate a ton of data. And as we split off, we only have about 55,000 employees now across two big business groups. So print and personal systems, and 3D printing is kind of an emerging area. And the key thing for us as a company is we're also evolving beyond just selling products, but selling services with those products. And data is a big part of those services. This is a little bit of my joke in terms of executive summary. Most folks, they come into big data, they have an expectation that things are magic. There's going to be a lot of magic dashboards that are automatically done with AI, and it's just going to produce gold bricks, right? And if you laughed at this slide a little bit, you've obviously been around long enough to know that most of the work is kind of a bit of a dirty job. And there's a lot of heavy lifting, and the gold bricks don't come easily, but they do come. Really the key thing here is what we've discovered is you can get a little bit closer to that reality, maybe not exactly, with Apache Spark and Databricks and some smart people. So this is what we're going to cover today. 3 parts: some history, a little bit of envisioning the future, and how we've been building together as a company. And that company is very distributed and very autonomous. So for an enterprise, it can be pretty challenging to coordinate things, thus the original title. But the other key thing to highlight here is, in terms of building together, this also needs to occur while living in the house, right? This is not something where we can just throw stuff away. We can't just start over. We have to keep all these systems moving while we move to new systems. That creates a lot of challenges. And while we're very focused on the future, and everyone loves to look at the future, there's quite a bit of instructional on looking to the past. So I'm a bit of an organizational archaeologist in terms of you ultimately will be doomed to repeat the past if you don't learn from it or understand it. So as we look back at our journey, if we go back to 1999 to 2009, that was really our data stone ages. You know, we had very primitive tools. I mean, you guys remember back when people had modems to collect to the internet? That's when we were collecting, you know, very, very simple data telemetry. On the print side, it was mostly for understanding supplies forecasting in our organization. The tools were very primitive. You know, we actually had people that were collecting data and putting things into Excel and spitting out kind of monthly to quarterly reports. This was often very limited. We'd get very incremental data collections. Wasn't very good with worldwide data. You know, the concentration of internet connectivity and modems worldwide wasn't really there yet. But overall, what we did for the times was actually not bad, given the tools we had. As you move to 2010 to 2014, I refer to that as kind of our big data Wild West, right? Everyone was beginning to see the value of data, and everyone was going nuts, right? And our distributed organization has caused some interesting challenges. Back then, we were with HP, and as the distributed organization and distributed business units, if you wanted to set up a big data system, you could. You could order racks of gear at cost from HP, right? We could get storage systems at cost, no charge for software, no charge for Vertica. So these things sprung up everywhere, practically like weeds. And at the same time, we were also growing lots of more data connectivity. So we were starting to get a lot more data in, people were instrumenting more. It was a great time had by all. Everyone was excited about the technologies. And you know, it was very exciting, very new, very fun. However, around circa 2015, we kind of woke up to see what happened, and it was like waking up with a bad hangover, okay, to be honest, right? Many things were actually getting harder, not easier, right? We had tremendous amount of inconsistencies. And while every business was doing quite well, in retrospect, kind of managing their piece, senior executives would come out and look at this, and it was completely fragmented across the company. And with more and more discussions happening on big data, being able to change the emphasis in an enterprise and get better data on your customers, that was viewed as not so good. And as we began to even look more about this, lots of teams had problems, and many of them had the same problems, and they were solving them over and over again. Right? How do you get the right internet connectivity? How do you work the right services with IT? And they were all getting solved over and over, and many times they're getting solved in different ways, and there wasn't enough leverage in sharing. So this turned into a very, very inefficient system for us. And overall, it was a very target-rich environment of problems, but not a huge collection of shared solutions. So what began to happen at that time is pockets of the company would find sort of tribal leaders, and we would start having discussions about how we could begin to move things forward. And a key piece of that discussion was, how could we envision the future? Now, I know this has nothing to do with big data, right? But Elon Musk, they've always done a fantastic job of describing a vision for the future where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's really what we wanted. We wanted a more symbiotic relationship among the platform components, and we wanted people to build whatever house they needed, okay? And this was really important. And as part of this, we had multiple catalysts that really kind of sprung forward to cause a shift in how we thought about things. So one of the key catalysts was we had an internal acknowledgement of a lot of the problems. And that's really kind of the first step, is acknowledging you had a problem. We were beginning to see emergent systems thinking. We had specific groups that were now starting to think in very platformish ways and trying to build solutions in platformish ways that could be shared. But again, they were still thinking rather narrowly, might be for print or might be for one. Still not enough, kind of pan HP discussion. And as part of this, with some of the discussions with sort of these tribal leaders, we ended up creating what we refer to internally as a virtual community. So this is, an organization of, regularly scheduled meetings that spans the whole globe. We get people together to share best practices, share pains, and discuss forward solutions. And right around that time, the HP corporate split happened. So this is where HP split into two, and that changes the equation now. We're no longer getting servers at cost. We no longer have access to free, storage and database systems. So it forced us to really think again about where we needed to be going. And as part of this, we set forth some key strategic goals. And one of the key objectives was focus on tangible business results and efficiencies. This is not ever intended to be a science project type endeavor. Okay, and really the key thing here is we've had long relationships with some of our IT organizations, but we really needed this to focus on being driven at the business to achieve their business results. There's no model of having a global queue and deciding at a global level what work gets done. Every business needs to be able to drive forward on their own to make their business successful. And if you can't do that, it's never going to be successful as a platform. So what we really strive to do was focusing on enablement, right? How do we enable people to get things done? And because many of us had grown up in situations where we didn't like being dictated or told what to do, we really wanted to minimize the things we had to force alignment on, right? Big data and many of these activities are very much in kind of the crossing the chasm and the tornado. There's a lot of change, right? If you look back 3-4 years ago, nobody was really talking about Spark, right? Everyone was talking about Hadoop, right? So things can come in, but we wanted to try to drive alignment only on the critical few. And architect for empowerment and data democracy. Many times these systems are locked up in write-only databases, and that's certainly not going to help folks. How do you get this out to the masses? I've certainly seen groups where they were very, very focused on delivering things to the executive vice presidents or the vice president, and you get a tremendous value out of that. But you're going to get even more value if you can get this down to every project manager and architect and engineer so they can see how what they're developing impacts customers and what's working and what's not. That's when you really truly have a data-driven organization. So as part of that, the tribal elders, so to speak, got together and we put together about 5 key decisions that we wanted to drive as a platform. So the first was driving the cloud platform and data lake. And there was obviously a little bit of controversy with this one. We selected AWS because most of the product systems from our web services and other websites and device services were already on AWS. So this is where all the data generators already were. Okay, so we clearly aligned on that. Spark was kind of the new kid in town. Several of us had already been working with Spark and found it to be a great solution, far better than Hadoop. And I think most of you already know this. One of the big things for us is it was far less opinionated, right? If you wanted to work with Java, great. If you wanted to work with Scala, great. If you want to work with Python, no problem. You're more of a science and math person, no problem. We got Spark R. It just really opens up the options for a wide audience to really engage with the platform. In terms of data format and warehouse, it was obviously Parquet and Redshift on AWS. And really the next piece was the data analysis tooling. I was part of a group that had been one of the first teams using Databricks, and this was great. I mean, for those of you that have not had to have folks stand up a Hadoop cluster on your own, you have no idea how much time you save with this. This is just fantastic. It's just enormously beneficial. And frankly, most of these decisions were very simple to make. In fact, we probably argued the most internally about Kafka versus Kinesis, but most of these other dominoes fell very, very quickly. We did end up going with Kinesis, but that's kind of another story. And here's the last one. And this was very deliberate. So if you look at this slide, we're talking about what's cloud hosted versus on-prem, and what was IT managed or IT owned versus business managed. And we had a lot of systems that had been historically IT managed, and we made a very conscious decision to move this into the cloud and managed by the business. So folks that are IT here might be, jumping out of their chest wanting to yell, but the reason we did this is not so much to take something away from IT, it was to force and drive alignment with the business, right? Many of our products are beginning to integrate more and more data analytics into their services. And that has to be housed and driven by the businesses to achieve results, right? And there's no longer this, it's just a BI and analytics tool. It's not. It's an entire environment for how your future products and services evolve. So a little bit about building together. I mentioned our HP virtual community, and it's grown pretty quickly. I would say in probably 6 to 9 months, we now have about 1,300 people out of 55,000 in our company that are within this virtual community. We have about 250 that are pretty active, and at the rate we're going, that's probably gonna double to about 2,500. So we're gonna end up with about 5% of the company involved in this virtual community, probably within another 9 to 12 months. I think that's pretty good. So here is the scary reality we looked at once we defined the goals and we started doing inventories. We had a lot of what we refer to as HAR, high ROI targets, and we had a very, very long, scary tail. And a lot of that stemmed from, like I mentioned before, people buying equipment. We had people running systems underneath their desks. It's kind of truly frightening how distributed these things can get. Sally gets a file from so-and-so, and they do some Excel analysis, and then it gets forwarded to Bob, who puts it into a report for a VP. Really not where you want to go. We got to move beyond this. So we need to start talking to these business teams and the engineers that had developed them. And this is a pretty scary situation for a lot of engineers, and I can certainly say it was scary for me when I've been on the other side of this one, when people have been asking me questions. Anytime you talk to anyone like this in any of these types of platforms, this is immediately what happens, right? Everyone is shields up, okay? And it's pretty normal, right? Because people are very busy, right? There's a model of risk and fear and concern with anything new. And I think like most of folks here that may have been in enterprises, many times some initiatives are fads. They'll fade. So a delay strategy is often a reasonable model. We needed to break through this, okay? So what we tried to do is break down these different projects into kind of different aspects based on their own risk and their current business model, where they're at in kind of the Jeffrey Moore spectrum. Are they early, are they Main Street, et cetera? So what we did is we took the early pioneers. So these were folks like the organization I managed that were already pioneers. We were already there. So that was kind of a no-brainer. That was really easy. We then focused on some new products that were coming out. These are things that are not gonna be out for a year or two. We got those guys on board. That was a little bit of work, not a ton. But most of this was kind of falling off a log easy, okay? So get some initial quick wins and move from there. Number 2, this is where we start migrating some of the big systems, these high ROI targets. And these were strategic for us because they were big. We can drive success with them. But these were also ones that we carefully selected where the sponsors and architects were already on board. They were part of those tribal elders that helped define this system, right? So this is a way to build success from moving legacy into the new at large scale. So it's not one of these, oh, you've only done small projects. We pick some big ones and key partners, right? So I would describe this phase as kind of migrating the willing and eager, right? So not really a lot of selling needed to be done, just typically work. And here's an example. I'm not going to go into a ton of details, but here's an example of one of the systems we had in legacy. So this is gathering somewhere between 3 and 5 billion data points a day. And it's got 40 plus legacy software clients out there. And actually, I think that 20 should have been 120 different hardware clients if you consider all the varying SKUs. So this was all built on a relatively old legacy architecture, right? So we have JBoss down there, and some of that JBoss code. You guys remember Java 1.5? Yeah, that's what a lot of this stuff was written in. Unit tests? Sorry, no. This got pushed into HDFS with some Hadoop code that was kind of migrated from the legacy Excel and SAS code into Vertica, and then there were some analysis. And that Hadoop code was pretty complicated. Again, missing unit tests. So obviously pretty difficult system. So how do you move this system from the past to the future while keeping it running? So one of the things we had was we had a telemetry system that was kind of, quote, modern, that had been built out, that was already in AWS, Elastic Infrastructure, was already using Spark, and this was built for some of our software telemetry. So what we decided to do is we decided to take that one, it was already in place and modern, and we decided to start wrapping some things around it. And there's 3 key things in this box. So the first one was over on the left, this clone proxy. So what we did here is we actually wrote some software. It's actually on GitHub, but documentation's a little weak. We should probably update that. That will take inbound requests, and it forks the data to 2 different systems, right? So there's an A side and a B side. And right now, the A side goes to our legacy systems, right? And the B side gets replicated to this other box here. And what we did is we wrote adapters. So this receives the data. This was work that would have been typically done at the JBoss layer. Receives the data, transforms it into a bit of a normalized form, and puts it through our telemetry system, okay? And then that data gets landed, and then all the work that was done down the bottom box with Hadoop 1 and Vertica ends up getting rewritten, this time with good unit tests and all the right kind of standard engineering. And you draw this diagram and see, it looks pretty good. Yeah, this is gonna be pretty easy. However, as you kind of go along and you find, oh yeah, documentation for those JBoss layers, oh yeah, not so much. Good documentation on how things were handled in the Hadoop layer before, not so much. So a lot of this became this huge archaeological exercise of reverse engineering a system. And the really great thing about it was, once we got kind of clone proxy, you could see the real data coming in. You could look at the docs and said, oh, A, B, and C are coming in, and that's it. And like, well, wait a minute, we've got all kinds of other data we see coming in. Not documented. Okay, let's go figure out what this is. So this is just an example of how we've been working to kind of keep the system running. Obviously, the plan is when we're ready to turn it off, we just kill that global load balancer and we publish everything to those adapters direct with DNS entries. But here's where we get to the difficult work. This is where really the hard work begins. This is the long tail of stragglers and the people that were not kind of the eager and willing to migrate. We're just really kind of beginning this journey right now. We still have a lot of work on kind of our number 2 priority. So this work is just beginning. But the trick here is, how do you get these people on board? You can't just go through with a hammer and tell them you have to move, right? You're gonna get a lot of pushback. So we embarked on kind of a 2-pronged approach. And this is really getting the folks in these groups and businesses to overcome their fear, okay? virtually all of the work up to this point has been done, I kind of call it preaching to the choir, right? Much like perhaps preaching to many of you. But we need to get past the choir. We got to get past the choir to the people in the pews, to the masses. And part of this stems from how do we get them to overcome the fear? Part of the fear is it's new, it's different, it's not invented here. What we've been doing is obviously leveraging our success with our early projects and getting folks then to internalize the benefits of this system, right? When you talk to these groups that may be managing some of their own hardware for some of these things, we often start with just, hey, why don't we just give you a Databricks account? Let's just load up some of your data on there. We can take them through and we can spin them up a 50 or 100 node cluster, boom, just like that. And at some point, you really start kind of internalizing and seeing that people are like, wow, okay, I get it. I can see how quickly and how efficiently this comes through. And most of these folks, you can get them, right? They kind of see it. But alas, like many things, this whole process is a journey. It hasn't been a destination. We've had a lot of discovered gaps. We have lots of different ways that we're doing geo. We're really trying to standardize on many of these things. And it's kicked off some, what I guess I'd refer to as some strategic siblings. And this has all been kind of part of our virtual community. So one of them was a data telemetry initiative. We're really trying to work to standardize some of our future data formats. Today we've got everything under the sun, from XML to JSON, all of different formats, all of different schemas, not without enough shared information. We've also put forth a large initiative on machine learning within the company. This is becoming more and more important as we work through things for products and services. We want to do more predictive fault measurement on our devices. We're already selling some of those services to now with our lasers, and it really creates new value for our customers. And we're obviously expanding beyond, and how can we better educate across our organization, have the right type of career paths, and how do we get more involved with university partnerships? A lot of time universities want data or don't have access to real world data. We're sitting on tons of data. It's a great way to work in conjunction. So, key takeaways for folks. Now I know most folks at this conference are probably very technical in nature. And the technology will help you solve the problems, but ultimately data and analytics are a cultural aspect. And you really need to foster that. You can't just sell a solution on software. You've got to create that culture. You can start with a tribe, build out your community of people, because the people are ultimately what get things done, right? The software's not going to do it for you, right? And really focus on the enablement and architect for empowerment. I can't overemphasize this enough. If you really want to be successful, you got to get it beyond just the vice presidents and folks using things. You really got to get this down to the lower levels. When you do that, you'll start seeing really amazing things come through. We've already seen some of it in our cases. We've had people looking at, for example, batteries. We found some great things where we had a problem with the supplier on batteries. We were able to track this down really quickly and get to our customers. Change is hard, and I think this is the one thing I think many technologists underestimate. But rolling these things out in an enterprise, especially when you're trying to keep things working as you're making changes, it's hard. But you got to find the right change agents and change leaders, and they will certainly help you in your exercise. This will make the migration of the technology much easier. So that's actually it. So thank you for attending. If folks have questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Do you have any questions?
Oh, and if anyone wants to know, I think it's going to be the Warriors in 4.
All good. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.